I'm Claudia. I am born and bred South African. I live in Cape Town. I'm 54 years old, youngest of three sisters. I come from an adverse background where as girls we had quite a tough father and I'd always have to fight for your voice. And the only way that I could really feel his acceptance was through academics. And in my being, I always felt that relationships were more important, and that relationships is the thing that actually makes us as human beings so unique and special. Anyway, fast forward, I experienced a lot of adverse things, and due to that also developed an eating disorder in my university years when I studied social work. And unbeknown to me, I mean, it came out in therapy, but it actually had to do with my relationship with my father. And I married men that was emotionally unavailable and will give this persona of protectors. But when I didn't know so much about trauma, I didn't know that it's actually to hide a part of them and the little boy in them that need protection themselves. So I worked in different settings as a social worker, and eventually I landed up managing a child and youth care center for teenage girls who were abused. And I could relate in my own story a lot to what all of them have gone through, whether it was abandonment or abuse. And I've realized, now this is about 2009, 2008, 2009, I've realized that somewhere we're missing a link in terms of dealing with trauma, because you can talk about it, you can do behavior modification, they can even go to psychiatrists and get medication, and nothing really changed for the better. Even though I already started working with trauma and understood that it's got to do with the body healing that needs to happen first before the cognitive therapy comes into play. Because people need to understand the brain develops from the bottom upwards, from the most simple parts to the more complicated parts. And to heal the brain and to heal the human being, you also need to heal the brain from the bottom upwards. That's got to do with the body and regulation. It's not got to do with the most intellectual and intelligent conversation I can have with you. If I can have a human being feel safe in their bodies in my presence, I already make a difference in their lives. You need a safe circle that understands trauma. And one of the things that I've been doing with 1,000 Women is to train volunteers in the communities around what does it mean to be a safe space for someone. And I mean, safe space doesn't mean that I give you advice or that I fix your problem for you, but also not to tell you, listen, you've now been on a year therapeutic journey and how come you still haven't changed? Because the fact is, there's a lot of stuff that's been developed over the years, the trauma release exercises that they do, TRE, yoga, that's very good. Anything that you can do for you to really get to know your body and what we call regulate. So it is about helping her to find, besides a safe circle, the things that she can do to understand and feel when my body's been triggered and how to bring it back to a regulated state. But that takes time. And often people want a quick fix, or they move on already to another relationship or something else, and then there's a collapse. And that's when they normally come to me and say, I don't understand what's happening. People need to understand, and this is often where cases of abuse is not taken seriously. So if I'm triggered and I'm traumatized, and because then there's an overload of cortisol, which is the stress hormone. The overload of cortisol shuts down your neocortex, which means that, and that's also where your speech center is. So often women will come to the police or wherever they go, and they go and report it, and then they can't give a correct version or a version that makes sense. And it is literally because the part of your brain where your speech center is shuts down. So you remember in fragments, and you remember through your 5 senses. And often it takes weeks before they will have a coherent statement out of her. So then the police and people will say, no, she's made up the story. Oh, no, she's not a credible witness, or the case gets thrown out because the man tells some other story. But it's because her body has gone in a complete shutdown mode, and there was an overload of cortisol, so her cortex doesn't work. And any guy that comes up to her then, and she feels violated, and her body feels the same as when the perpetrator was in front of her, is going to cause her nervous system to shut down again, and immediately she won't be able to give you any response verbally. That's the first thing. So there needs to be training among the justice people, the police, around what trauma does to the body, and what it means if a male police officer comes and stands, in front of you. Tell me your story. What is wrong with you? Because she's going to feel violated again. And the second part is domestic violence is a male issue. It's not a female issue. About, I think last week or the week before, the UN women representative in South Africa was on Newsroom Africa. And she said, women have now done everything that they can. How are we going to get men? And if you think about it, we always say so many women have been violated. So many women have been raped. So many women have been murdered, which means it's not in the active sense for men. So men don't take responsibility. We need to change the narrative and say, so many men have killed women. So many men have violated women. Because then it's a verb and it's in the active. That's the second thing. And the other thing is, we need to start training men and have conversations with men about relationships.